Hi everyone, David Aragona here, taking a look at the feature race at Belmont at the Big A on Saturday. One of four stakes races the running on this card is race 7, the Grade 2 Man o' War, going a mile and 3/8 on the turf course at Aqueduct. We've got a field of 9 signed on for this race, and you'll notice that towards the outside are the two morning line favorites, both going out for the Charlie Appleby barn. Charlie Appleby runners are always dangerous in these graded stakes races when they ship over. The number 8, Silver Knott, actually coming off a victory in the United States when he won the Grade 2 Elkhorn last month at Keeneland. The number 9, though, Nation's Pride, feels like the one coming in with the most back class. He was the winner of the Grade 1 Canadian International last year, had plenty of success in New York as a 3-year-old back in 2022. So those two feel like they're going to be a formidable presence in this Man o' War, but there are some others coming in with upside, and there's also some pace in this race as we take a look at the Timeform US pace projector. A surprising amount of pace for a race going a marathon distance, and integral to how fast this pace does play out are a couple of big long shots, both going out for trainer Nightpaul Chatterpaul, those being the number 3, So High, who has been known to run off in some of these marathon races, actually finishing 3rd in the Turf Classic last year, utilizing those tactics, as well as recent claim, the number 7, Rocket and Roll, who doesn't look too competitive based on form, but does figure to be a horse that's forwardly placed in this race if he does ultimately start. Among those Charlie Appleby runners, the one who seems to have the most tactical speed is the number 8, Silver Knott. He's actually shown just barely leading after getting a forwardly placed trip in that victory last time at Keeneland, but we'll see if the pace of this race is reasonable enough for him to be forward, because those two long shots could run off on the front end, and that could create a difficult pace situation for anybody that wants to chase them in the early stages. A horse that would appreciate any pace that develops is the number 2, Cortez. You see him all the way on the left of the pace projector with that LP flag indicating that he has the highest Timeform US late pace rating in this field. Let's go through these runners in post position order, beginning with the number 1, Ohana Honor. And he's coming off an impressive victory last time out at Keeneland when he got the job done by over 5 lengths in his first start going a marathon distance on the turf. And he showed uncharacteristic speed that day because going those conventional route distances, around a mile and 1/8, he had been more of a closing type and had often run out of ground in those races. But stretching out to the 1.5 miles, he found himself on the early lead and just extended his advantage every step of the way, earning a huge 1:23 Timeform US speed figure. A repeat of that number would make him pretty competitive in this race, but I'm not sure he's going to be able to achieve the same kind of trip in this Man o' War, given all of those other speeds. You saw he wasn't shown anywhere near the front on the Timeform US pace projector, so I'm just not sure how the trip is going to work out for Ohana Honor, but it is possible that he does appreciate these longer distances. The number 2 is Cortez, and we'll take a look at his most recent start in the Pan American, when he came from off the pace to get the job done in his stateside debut, beating a couple of rivals that he'll face again in this race. As to alter course, just slightly there in the stretch, but it got a very good trip up until that point, was rated in the pocket, wanted to go a little bit earlier than maybe Joel Rosario wanted him to, as he was trying to keep a lid on him for most of the race, but once he peeled him out into the clear at the top of the stretch, he was able to mow that field down with a solid 1:20 Timeform US speed figure. He had shown real quality in his prior starts over in France with Andre Fabre, not necessarily winning group races, but finishing competitively with horses like Place de Carousel 3-back, who went on to win the Prix Foix in the next start, Sim Camille, who was a multiple group stakes winner, and just keeping very good company at a number of races and running competitively into those spots. So I think this horse might have more upside than that first victory in this country might indicate. The number 3 is So High, and he is one of the potential pace players in this race. Like I mentioned, he got a very enterprising ride in the Turf Classic over this course back in October of last year, opening up a 19-length lead in the early stages before ultimately fading to 3rd, but holding on for 3rd at a big price that day. He went off at 90-1 and rounded out the trifecta. Since then, hasn't been as successful when he tried Stakes Company in the Red Smith or the Valedictory up in Canada, but did come back off the layoff last time with a good effort, causing a minor upset, winning a first-level allowance race, now stepping right back up into Stakes Company. We'll see if they try to send him out to a long lead once again, and if that works out as well as it did in the Turf Classic, but he can be an unpredictable runner in these types of races. The number 4 is Harry Hood. He's another runner coming out of the Pan American that Cortez won, and he actually lost to that rival by only a nose. You might say Harry Hood doing as well as he did in that race is an indictment of the entire Pan American field, because he went off at 14-1 in that spot, was coming out of allowance races without any prior higher stakes experience, but he might be a horse just really appreciated the added ground. He seemed to take a step forward when first stretched out to a mile and a half back in January at Gulfstream Park for Mark Hennig, and has run well in all of his marathon starts. He does have to improve a little bit based on the Pan American result, losing to Cortez by a nose. And you could argue that Cortez is the one that has more upside coming out of that race. But he definitely is a horse that appears to be in career best form and does figure to be a big price once again. Up next is the number 5, Tawny Port. He's another horse coming out of the Grade 2 Pan American, actually the narrow third place finisher in that race in the replay that we just took a look at for Cortez. And you could argue that he had to wait a little bit longer behind the leaders in traffic than Irad Ortiz really wanted him to. He was sitting a very good trip until about the quarter pole, but got locked in when his stablemate Cortez moved to the outside and got into the clear. And Irad Ortiz just had to maybe sit for a 16th of a mile or an 1/8 of a mile longer in that pocket than he really wanted to. Tawny Port did get loose at the end and just sort of ran out of real estate, getting up for third in that race. You could argue that maybe he would have won with a slightly better timed ride at the very end, but he would have done so with a perfect trip. He ran well too back in the Mac Diarmida as well in a similar sort of spot, got us the same 1:23 time form US speed figure for that race. I think that was a slightly softer field. Some of the runners that were in there, they all got career best numbers and they've since regressed a little bit. So I wonder if that number is really going to hold up over time. It does make sense for Tawny Port, and he's run some speed figures that do put him in the mix here. I just feel like from an overall quality standpoint, he doesn't have the same upside as some others do coming into this race. A horse that certainly has some upside is the number 6 Greek Order, and he better have some upside because he did not run nearly well enough to win this race when he made his U.S. debut in a first level allowance race at Keeneland. Pretty disappointing, finishing 6th as the 7-5 favorite. That was probably a means to an end, though, because starting him out going a mile, just not his ideal distance. He's a horse that was really cycling up to his best form when they stretched him out in Europe last year, going a mile and a quarter when he was successful in a handicap back in August, and then running third in another mile and a quarter race when he made his final start in Europe at Newmarket back in November of last year. And he was really heading in the right direction, an impressive winner of that handicap over the summer before holding his own in a 34-horse field at Newmarket in September last year, just barely losing that race. Like I said, came off the layoff going a mile, and while he did get some pace to close into, that was a race that was dominated towards the front end. He had to swing wide to make his run and just never really was able to get into the mix of the race. I think he's going to do better stretching out in distance. The problem is he's stepping up into a pretty tough spot here in the Man of War, and it's unclear if he possesses the quality to step up against this field. I will say he does have plenty of upside. He's only a 4-year-old, so I think he has a license to do better. We'll just see if he can take that big step forward. The positive is he does figure to be a nice price for Dangerous Connections. The number 7 is Rocket and Roll. He is the other speedy Nightpole Chatterball trainee in this race, obviously based on form. This horse is not a contender. He was claimed for $20,000 last time out, and now he's making his first start off the claim in a Grade 2 stakes race, also trying a surface that he's never won over. He does have plenty of turf pedigree, and he actually tried turf once for his previous barn when going out for Brad Cox. Was not successful that day, and that was a New York bred allowance race, so this is a completely different galaxy of course quality than what he was meeting that day. We'll see if this horse ultimately is fast enough to set the pace, but it would be a big surprise if he is around at the end. And now for the 2 Charlie Appleby runners. The number 8 Silver Knott, drawn 1 from the outside. We'll take a look at him winning the Grade 2 Elkhorn at Keeneland in April, and got a very good trip in this race. This race was dominated towards the front end. He was just tracking outside of an overmatched front runner, took over from that foe, and is able to hold off his 2 main rivals in the stretch, one of which had shown some really good form out in California, that being runner-up Miss the Cut, as well as stablemate Bold Act, who he was able to beat. Bold Act was actually the odds-on favorite coming into this race, and probably didn't get the best of trips, was a little too rank and keen in the early stages, whereas Silver Knott was able to settle much better and hold on to win that race. But I do think it's worth noting he did take a step forward, stretching out in distance for the first time. And while I never personally pegged this horse as one that raced like he was going to appreciate added ground, he certainly has the pedigree for it. His dam was a winner going marathon distances in Europe, just stamina throughout his female family. And Charlie Appleby, obviously aware of that, wanting to get this horse out to a marathon distance. And he proved him right when he experimented with it last time, delivering the victory at over 5-1. He's going to be a shorter price in this race, stepping up against what could be be a slightly better field, but he's got the kind of running style that ensures he almost always works out a good trip. And even going back to his form from last year, that third place finish in the Hollywood Derby looks a little better in retrospect when you consider that Program Trading and Web Slinger finished first and third just last week in the Grade 1 Turf Classic on the Derby undercard, which is probably the strongest field of turf horses that's been assembled anywhere so far in 2024. So Silver Knott comes in with pretty strong form, and based on the evidence of the last race, he is going to get the distance. Number 9 is Nation's Pride. He is the horse that I think could go off at a shorter price of the two Charlie Appleby trainees coming into this race, and he was at his best on this day, too, back at Woodbine when he won the Grade 1 Canadian International in October of 2023. Not the most competitive field. His only serious rival was the horse that he's running down in the stretch here, that a fellow European shipper, Royal Champion, and he's able to get the better of that foe as these two open up a big margin on the rest of the field. He got a massive 131 time form US speed figure for this race, and a repeat of that number is going to make him way too tough for his Man of War rivals to handle. The knock against Nation's Pride is that his most recent race in Bahrain was pretty disappointing. He is a horse that was probably supposed to beat that field based on his form coming in, and what little we had seen from him in 2023 had been pretty strong, but he was disappointing. He did break from an outside gate that day and just never had any cover racing forwardly throughout, and couldn't see out the trip in a race that was won from off the pace by the classy Spirit Dancer. So maybe you can give him a minor excuse. Now he's coming back off the layoff. Interesting that Charlie Appleby has targeted this spot, probably because he's run so well in New York before. Nation's Pride came very close to sweeping that New York Turf Triple back in 2022, including his victory at Aqueduct in the Jockey Club Derby. Now returning to the site of that win, getting Frankie Dettori back aboard, you've got to take Nation's Pride pretty seriously in this Man of War. Well, let's throw out my picks for this race, and while I do think that those two Charlie Appleby runners are very dangerous, slightly preferring Silver Knott because I think he's going to be the better price, and he probably has just a smidgen more upside than Nation's Pride does at this point in his career. I'm going to put the number 2 Cortez on top. I think this horse is going to be a fair price. I've got him pegged at 5-1 on the morning line. I think he should be every bit of that given the presence of those two Godolphin runners. And while I don't think he's quite good enough to win this race if he merely repeats his Pan American, I think he's the kind of horse that does have forward to go in the Christophe Clement barn. Like I said, he showed real quality last year in France, and I think he's a horse that can take a step forward second off the layoff while spending more time with the Clement stable. So the number 2 Cortez for me in race 7 at Aqueduct on Saturday, the Grade 2 Man of War. Good luck if you're playing the races this weekend.